Hey everyone, here is a brief overview of Chapter 20 entitled Industry and Empire. Still going on here. Hopefully you've seen by now just how important and transitional this industrial period was, and now we've seen the consequences within the country, and as industry grows now we're going to expand, and the United States really starts looking outward for the first time. So it starts out with this story just seeing the importance of big business with J.P. Morgan and Grover Cleveland, and how really the U.S. government had to be bailed out in the 1890s by private businessmen. It mentions the closing of the frontier, basically, this thesis of Frederick Jackson Turner, and how the ramifications that as there were fewer and fewer places for Americans to settle, if you're in the survival of the fittest mentality of social Darwinism, you've still got to find ways to open markets and be strong and a leader in the world. And if you want money, you're going to have to reach those foreign markets on other sides of the sea. Mentions just the emphasis on productivity, trying to, with things like on page 597, Isaac Singer's sewing machine, the efficiency mentioned on page 599, driving that competition, driving that industry, and that causes labor problems. We've already seen those occur, but you get the Homestead strike with Andrew Carnegie, and the Pullman Strike, massive strike in Chicago. These things are going to spread beyond the cities themselves, results in violence, people being arrested. So we still see these ongoing labor issues that aren't always civil or handled in a civil manner, that are occurring within the country as some business people are getting really, really rich, and some workers have greater demands and are not getting compensated adequately for that. So big business still playing a huge role during that time. Then it starts to get into this economic stuff. In the late 1800s, the modern economy, and one of the things mentioned on 602 is this idea of free silver. And this becomes a huge issue for the Populist Party, and for farmers. And basically what they're saying is, okay, money is supposed to be precious, and the dollar bills that you have are supposed to represent a certain amount of hard coin, or specie, as it's sometimes called. I'm looking to see if it says specie in the book. If you increase the amount of coins or specie in the currency, then those dollars become a little less valuable, because they're not quite as precious. And so as large amounts of silver were found and the government's printing these greenbacks, a lot of people said, okay, we want better interest rates, we want better credit. The way to do that is to have more money in circulation, so we want there to be free mining of silver. And that ends up with a lot of political debate between William McKinley, between Grover Cleveland, between William Jennings Bryan, leader of the Populist Party, and the Democrats. They are supported by both groups. So silver and the economy become huge issues. Also going on at the same time is the emergence of Jim Crow. And Jim Crow laws passed as discriminatory measures in the country. This notorious case of Plessy versus Ferguson, usually viewed as one of the two worst Supreme Court decisions in U.S. history. Plessy versus Ferguson establishes separate but equal. And so you'll see things like this up through the 1950s and 60s with integration, when another Supreme Court decision will reverse this. But this means when Homer Plessy is arrested, that as long as something here, like in this image, a water fountain. It's serving the same purpose. It's providing water. But you see that the white water fountain has a refrigerator in it. It's newer, it's nicer, as opposed to the one for blacks. And they're saying it provides the same service, but you can see where that has racial issues. The danger of lynching, of poll taxes, different approaches that African Americans take. It mentions Booker T. Washington, who forms the Tuskegee Institute, and Washington, kind of this accommodation person. He basically says to the African American community, okay, the way to be treated well is to work hard, get a vocation, earn the respect of others, and they'll treat you kindly. And he's not, supporting violence or protests. He basically wants to earn the respect and have people work hard. So lots of white people very supportive of that, but we'll see others who take different approaches later on. Women being excluded as well. The difficulties for labor unions and groups, as big business is having a lot of people on their side in the government. Then it gets into diplomacy. Mentions Alfred T. Mahan, who writes this famous book talking about how the nations of the world that have dominated history all had control of the sea. So trying to get the United States to develop a greater navy. We do that, so we're kind of starting to build up our forces. We're starting to try, we as in the United States, trying to get more of a foot in the door. There's a situation in China, people scrambling to carve up Africa, countries in Europe and the United States trying to start to divvy things up amongst themselves. We get into a war with Spain, the Spanish-American War in 1898. The Spanish have been treating the Cubans pretty badly. The United States sends down the USS Maine, which we're not officially getting involved in the war, but the Maine sinks on February 15th of 1898. Still debated to this day. National Geographic, the U.S. Navy, there are all these studies still on whether it was, mentions there on page 613 that it was later concluded that boilers had exploded accidentally. But still, it's somewhat debated today, and you'll see news investigation things every few years about the USS Maine. But without that open mind, a newspaper guy, William Randolph Hearst, starts to blame Spain instantly to sell newspapers. And so the U.S. kind of pressured under McKinley to declare war. It's a short war. We get the Rough Riders with Teddy Roosevelt. On a side note, Hearst has this becomes one of the richest people in the world, has this huge castle out in the middle of California. He calls it a castle. You can go visit. So he gets really, really rich from the newspapers that he sells. Getting to the struggle with the Philippines, people opposed to imperialism, meaning trying to build an empire. The open door situation in China as we try to get a foot in the door there, and that leads to the Boxer Rebellion, which doesn't deter Western countries, being the United States and Europe, and Japan is in there too a little bit as well. Japan is a different type of Asian country, but all these problems now. So we're industrializing, we've got the resources, we want to reach more markets. That's leading to this quest for empire. So the country continuing to change and grow and kind of turn outward.